During the 2019 federal election campaign, as a candidate with the Greens, I ran a series of public conversations supported by the Canberra Alliance for Participatory Democracy that we called People In. A Better Politics Needs All of Us, discussing with members of the Canberra community what they would like to see from their MP and how they'd like to relate to their MP as a true representative of the community. We called the project People In because a broad theme of the Greens election platform that year was to get the money out of politics and bring the people in. But the focus of most of the policy was on the absolutely important aspect of getting the money out. I wanted to explore more deeply the practices of getting the people in. And in a representative democracy, that starts with how the MP, the member of the House of Representatives, works to truly represent the people. I've long been fascinated by how well-facilitated deliberative conversations can create the space for people to come up with brilliant, creative solutions that people coming from quite different perspectives can agree to. And I've long thought that our current political model does the opposite. It makes political discussion into pitched battles that tend to deliver bad outcomes and drive people ever further apart. Politics shouldn't have to make us angry. It shouldn't have to divide us. If we relearn how to disagree constructively, it can be a fun, exciting, creative space where the people come together to co-determine our common future. Participation, true, deep, deliberative participation, as I said at those meetings, makes for better policy outcomes, better politics, and better, more cohesive and resilient communities. What I'm going to do in this video session is outline a bit about the process we used, talk about key themes that came up, highlight some of the specific ideas that were raised, and make some suggestions about where to from here. We'll follow up with a discussion in a live Zoom forum on the weekend where I hope we can dig a little deeper. So, we held 5 meetings across the electorate of Canberra over the course of a few months at Gorman House in Ainslie, a church hall in Curtin, a cafe in Aranda, the ANU Food Co-op, and a final meeting at the Theo Notaras Centre in Civic. There was a stark difference in attendance at these different meetings, which we publicised mostly through postering in the local area, as well as notification through social media and email lists, and in a couple of cases, letterbox drops in the neighbourhood. That seemed to be particularly effective in Ainslie and in Aranda, where we had quite a large number of attendees who weren't already known to us. A relevant thing to note is that while we in no way wanted to hide that these were Greens events, we did want to attract people who didn't already identify as Greens to make the participation and contributions broader and more reflective of the wider community. So the flyers and posters were orange, for instance, rather than green, but they included our logo and my name. At these meetings, we ran facilitated conversations, World Cafe style, with people seated at tables of up to 6 and talking through ideas together with butcher's paper and sticky notes and pens. We started each session with a bit of a guide about how to have respectful conversations where we listen to each other, building on each other's ideas, so as to set expectations, often led by one of CAPAD's facilitators. Then we asked people to move to tables where they didn't know too many other people, and we posed 2 questions for them to discuss. What would you like to see from your federal MP to improve democratic representation? And how would you like to relate to and communicate with your federal MP? We asked people to report back to the larger group, sharing their discussions, and we rotated groups for the second question. I then collected the papers and collated the ideas, which I reported back at the final session and in an opinion piece for the Canberra Times. The most joyful thing for me was watching how people just plunged into these conversations. Especially at the larger meetings, no sooner had we asked the questions than the room was abuzz with discussion. In the smaller sessions, it took a little more prompting and stimulus, so that was an interesting and useful lesson. But there too, once discussion took off, it really took off and was hard to rein in when we reached time. One issue we found we needed to discuss in each session, the elephant in the room in a sense, was the extent to which a candidate representing a party could also be a representative for a wider community. If you come in with an agreed policy platform, how can you also listen to the community, was the question that often came up. I found that the conversations consistently came together around an appreciation that every one of us comes to any discussion with a particular viewpoint, and that political conversations can and should be about listening to each other and finding common ground about how to apply that viewpoint in a particular set of circumstances, and each set will be unique. In a sense, an advantage of a party representative over an independent is a clarity and openness about the perspective you bring to the table for those conversations. As long as you're willing to listen, and as long as you're from a party which similarly operates on a model of listening and seeking consensus. Which leads us to the overarching theme that came through incredibly strongly in these meetings. People made it clear that they want to be heard, and they want to know that they've been listened to. But they understand that in politics, as in any situation where multiple voices need to be heard, they won't always get what they want, or more to the point, what they came in wanting. What I heard loud and clear is that people wanted to be able to have the confidence that their opinion was taken into account in the process the MP took in reaching their decision. They wanted, in this light, opportunities to voice their opinions, ways to discuss those opinions with an MP and with others in the community, including expert opinions, and crucially, reporting back from the MP about how they then took the various views into account in coming to their decision. They wanted their MP to do them the courtesy of explaining to them what actually happened. Did other lobbyists change their mind? Did the party room or caucus roll them? Did they get a shift in position from their party room or caucus thanks to the views of the community? The final outcome is important, but the explanation about how it was reached is actually, in some very real ways for democracy, more important. That, to me, was the absolute light bulb moment several times through the process. It's the central lesson of this whole experiment for me. The process itself is where participatory politics gets its magic. The process of listening to a diverse range of voices, of discussing them together, and of feeding back how those voices informed the decision. We cultivate trust and respect by showing trust and respect. We cultivate cohesion by living it. It's democracy as a living practice that we have to feed and water and tend by doing it all the time. Listen, discuss, feedback, listen some more. And if the feedback shows you're not listening, you probably won't get re-elected. Out of this process fell some very specific recommendations, which I'll just briefly take you through now, looking at the summaries that I made of my discussions. And I'm going to share the screen. Hopefully it will work. Here we go. So what was raised was the need to have regular forums. And they were a space for consultation and reporting. They should have had a regular schedule, was the idea. And they need, obviously, to be well facilitated so that we can have deliberative and discursive conversations. It was really important to a lot of people that the meetings had food and conviviality, that they were a good, happy and fun space for people to discuss in. They needed to be publicised well before, and the results needed to be reported back. They needed to be inclusive, rotating across areas, making expertise available, and the feedback was a crucial point. There was a lot of discussion of broad engagement across the community, that a local MP could perhaps provide discussion packs for kitchen table conversations, that the MP needed to be visible and welcoming and accessible, and their electorate office the same, needed to be a meeting place and a resource and a space for what the British call surgeries, where the MP just makes themselves available for people to pop in. The MP should also attend other people's meetings and properly inform the community about what's going on, inviting community monitoring, inviting participation in parliamentary work, and providing a community database for what else is going on in the community. It was obviously really important already then that there should be online accessibility, and that's only become much more important. One of the reasons was simply making it accessible, making participation accessible to more people, but also the capacity for privacy and anonymity, which is important to many people. It's important for making inclusive conversations. which aren't necessarily always typical online, but there are ways and platforms like Lumio and Plaza Podemos which do it really well. And there was this idea of a website that could host a schedule of meetings, information about issues under discussion, expert opinions, progress reports, and where the opportunities for participation were. There's a lot of interest in regular community citizens' assemblies of various kinds on key issues. They might look like policy roundtables with experts and citizens. There was a whole lot of discussion around whether they should be, random sortition or self-selection for people coming together, and definitely a lot of discussion that you could have both and that both were important. Discussion, of course, of how the information for these sessions should be gathered, by whom and how. The importance of having time at those sessions for people to get to know each other. And the really great role of an MP hosting them with the capacity to potentially get the Public Service or the Parliamentary Budget Office to provide information and advice. The issues for those assemblies, how should they be selected? Some suggested that civil society groups should recommend them. Some suggested that local media should play an important and constructive role. And of course, lots of opportunities for citizens to engage and propose issues for discussion through suggestion boxes, poster walls, online scope, and that kind of thing. And of course, there was discussion of the challenges involved in this kind of process. How to deal in these kinds of conversations with prejudiced views, how to deal with people who are interrupting the process and in fact making it much more difficult for other citizens to actually participate and contribute. Really important conversations about who should be included. Is it just voters? Or should it be more broadly all residents? Should it include children? And the related question of how to be representative of the community at large through these kinds of processes. So I'll stop sharing the screen now. They were kind of the key fundamental, specific issues that came up. And I did have plans to run a much deeper version of this approach for the upcoming federal election. But of course, COVID got in the way. And in some ways, COVID's thrown a bit of a spanner in the works for this whole approach, at least temporarily. Because while Zoom meetings can work, they're really no substitute for the magic of in-person conversations that you get when you're in the same room with people. I have a lot of hope, though, that we can run some fantastic conversations, not just here in Canberra, but around the country as part of sort of post-COVID planning, where we can discuss what went well with things like mutual aid responses, what went badly, who did well through this process, who got left behind, and how can we make sure that next time something happens like this, we can do better together. Finally, I offer these ideas, of course, to anyone in or around politics to use. They're not mine, they're ours. But I emphasise that the process was the point of the exercise, much more than the ideas themselves. What we really need to do is find as many ways as possible that we can get to bring the people in to politics, because that's how we build social cohesion. That's how we get good quality decisions for all of us. And that's how we cultivate a healthy democracy.